The train rattled along the tracks, a low, rhythmic hum filling the nearly empty carriage. I sat in my usual seat, second from the back, staring at the flickering overhead light. My fingers tapped anxiously against the spine of my worn-out notebook, the same one I carried every day, the one filled with half-baked plots and unfinished sentences. Writing had always been my escape, but lately it felt like I was running on fumes. Rejection after rejection had drained me, each one chipping away at the fragile belief that I was meant to be a storyteller. That was when I saw it, a small, leather-bound diary left abandoned on the seat across from me. The train jolted and the book slid slightly forward, as if inviting me to pick it up. I hesitated. It wasn't mine. Someone might come back for it. But as the minutes passed and the doors hissed open at each stop, no one returned. My curiosity got the better of me. The leather was smooth, warm under my fingertips, as if recently handled. I traced the gold-embossed initials on the cover, J.I., before flipping it open. The first page sent a shiver down my spine. I killed her at 11:37 p.m. on Oak Ridge Lane. She never saw me coming. I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. The handwriting was sharp and deliberate, each letter carefully formed, almost methodical. I turned the page. She struggled. Of course she did. They always do. But I held tight, just like before. Just like, I'll do again. A date was scribbled in the corner. Last night. My throat went dry. This had to be a joke. Some twisted writing exercise, maybe. A fellow writer testing out a new thriller plot. That had to be it. But as I read further, unease twisted in my gut. Each entry detailed a different murder, spanning months. Locations, methods, descriptions so vivid I felt like I was there, watching, helpless. The way the victims gasped for air. The way their fingers clawed at their attacker. The way their eyes dimmed as life left their bodies. This wasn't fiction. I slammed the book shut, my hands trembling. A cold sweat prickled at my skin. Then I saw the last entry. My name. My name was in the diary. And below it, scrawled in fresh ink. Tomorrow, 10:45 p.m. My breath came in ragged gasps. My fingers dug into the diary's spine, leaving crescent-shaped indentations. I scanned the carriage, suddenly hyper-aware of every shadow, every slight movement. The man in the corner with his hood pulled low over his face, the woman scrolling through her phone, her gaze flicking up every so often. Had someone been watching me? Had they planted this diary here for me to find? The train lurched to a stop. I bolted upright, nearly dropping the book. My station. I needed to get out, get home, get away from this nightmare. I stuffed the diary into my bag and practically sprinted onto the platform, my heart hammering against my ribs. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but it did nothing to clear the fog of panic clouding my mind. I needed to tell someone. The police. Anyone. But what would I even say? That I'd found a diary predicting my own murder? That some faceless killer knew my name, my routine, my exact fate? I glanced over my shoulder. The platform was nearly empty now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still there, watching. I hurried down the street, forcing myself not to look back again. My apartment was only a few blocks away. If I could just make it home, lock the doors, maybe this would all turn out to be some sick prank. But as I reached my building and fumbled for my keys, something stopped me cold. A small, folded piece of paper wedged into my mailbox. My hands shook as I pulled it free and unfolded it. 3 words written in the same sharp handwriting as the diary. Look behind you. A floorboard creaked. My stomach dropped. The door behind me, my door, slowly began to open. And then I saw him, a figure standing in the darkness of my apartment, holding a pen identical to mine, smiling. I've been waiting for you to finish our story. My breath caught in my throat. The figure stood just inside my apartment, his silhouette stretching toward me in the dim light. My grip tightened around the diary, fingers pressing into the leather like it was some kind of lifeline. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get as far away as possible, but my feet felt cemented to the ground. He took a slow step forward. I saw him more clearly now. He wasn't some monstrous, looming presence. He looked ordinary. A man in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, clean-shaven, neatly pressed clothes, a face I might not have given a second glance to in passing. And yet there was something profoundly wrong about him. "You're early," he said, tilting his head slightly. His voice was smooth, almost amused. I had to move. My mind snapped back into place and I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the steps leading to my apartment entrance. My pulse roared in my ears as I turned and sprinted down the street. I didn't know where I was going, just away. The city lights blurred around me as I weaved through the streets, my lungs burning with each panicked breath. I could still feel his presence, like a shadow lingering at my back, but I didn't dare turn around. I reached a busy intersection and forced myself to stop, doubling over, trying to steady my breathing. People passed by, oblivious, their faces glowing in the artificial light of their phone screens. Normal life continued all around me, and yet I was trapped in some waking nightmare. I dug into my bag, fingers shaking as I pulled out the diary. I flipped to the last page again. My name, my death, predicted down to the minute, and now a new line, appearing as I watched. "You're going the wrong way." My stomach twisted. I slammed the book shut and spun around, scanning the crowd, the sidewalks, the shadows beyond the streetlights. Was he still following me? Had he written that? How? A taxi pulled up to the curb beside me, and without thinking, I yanked open the door and threw myself inside. "Where to?" the driver asked, barely glancing at me. I hesitated. Home was out of the question. Anywhere familiar felt dangerous. I needed time to think. "Just drive," I said, my voice hoarse. The driver frowned, but pulled away from the curb. I sank back against the seat, pressing a hand to my chest, trying to slow the erratic pounding of my heart. The city lights streaked past the window, blurring into smears of neon and darkness. My thoughts raced. Who was he? How did he know me? Was this some elaborate stalker, or was I losing my mind? I opened the diary again, flipping through the pages, searching for answers. The entries were disturbingly detailed, each victim's last moments described with chilling precision. The way they begged, the way their bodies went still, the way he felt afterward. Nothing at all. Then I noticed something I had missed before, a pattern. Each victim had been found near a transit line, killed late at night, always alone. He was choosing people like me, people who drifted through the city unnoticed, and then my breath stopped altogether. One of the names. A woman. Her body had been found last week, strangled. The exact details were in the diary, things I hadn't read in the news. This was real. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "You okay?" I barely heard him. My fingers gripped the pages so tightly they threatened to tear. I had to go to the police. "Now change of plans," I said, trying to steady my voice. "Take me to the nearest station." The driver nodded and made a turn. I exhaled slowly. Maybe they wouldn't believe me, but I had evidence. The diary, the notes, my name written inside it. But as I looked back down, I felt the blood drain from my face. The page had changed again. New words forming beneath my name. "You shouldn't have done that." The taxi suddenly swerved. The tires screeched against the pavement, and my body was thrown sideways as the driver cursed, yanking the wheel. Another car had veered directly into our lane, its headlights blinding. The last thing I saw before impact was a figure standing on the sidewalk, watching. Metal screamed as the taxi spun, the impact slamming me hard against the door. The seatbelt bit into my ribs, my vision blurring as the world outside twisted in a violent blur of headlights and pavement. The driver shouted something, but his voice was lost in the chaos. Then silence. For a moment, all I could hear was the ticking of the engine and my own ragged breathing. My head throbbed, my hands numb as I fumbled to release the seatbelt. The car had come to a stop on the sidewalk, its hood crumpled, windshield fractured like a spiderweb. The driver groaned beside me, blood trickling down his forehead. I turned, trying to see the other car. It had stopped in the middle of the road, hazard lights blinking. The door was open, but the driver was gone. Cold fear coiled in my stomach. I shoved the taxi door open and stumbled onto the pavement, my legs unsteady beneath me. A few people had gathered at a distance, hesitant, watching. No one had seen where the other driver went. Then I felt it again. That presence. My gaze snapped to the sidewalk across the street. There he was, the man from my apartment. He stood just beyond the streetlight's reach, his face still unreadable, his hands tucked into the pockets of his dark coat. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was just watching. A slow, sinking realization settled in my chest. The crash hadn't been an accident. He had orchestrated this. I took a shaky step backward. My first instinct was to run, but my limbs refused to move fast enough. The diary was still clutched in my hand, the leather warm and damp with sweat. More words had appeared. You can't run forever. My fingers clenched around the book. I had to do something. Call the police. Get help. Anything. But my mind felt fogged, sluggish, like I was moving through water. A siren wailed in the distance. The man's gaze flicked toward the approaching lights. He took a step back, melting into the shadows of a nearby alleyway. I wanted to follow, to scream for someone to stop him, but my voice caught in my throat. A hand grabbed my shoulder. I flinched, spinning around, but it was just the taxi driver, his face pale, blood still dripping from his temple. You okay? His voice was hoarse, unsteady. I nodded quickly, but my pulse was still racing. I turned back toward the alley. The man was gone. The police arrived within minutes. I tried to explain everything, but my words felt disjointed, ridiculous even as I spoke them out loud. A diary predicting murders, a stranger who knew my name, a car crash that was anything but random. The officer, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, took notes but didn't seem convinced. When I showed him the diary, he flipped through it, expression unreadable. Where did you get this? He asked. I found it. On the train, he studied me for a long moment, then sighed, shutting the book. You should go to the hospital. Get checked out. I grabbed his wrist before he could hand the diary back. Please, you have to believe me. My name is in there. For tonight. He hesitated. His gaze softened just slightly. We'll look into it. It wasn't enough. An officer took my statement, but I could see it in their faces. They thought I was just rattled from the crash, maybe even making it up. They had bigger crimes to deal with, real ones. I was still in danger. The paramedics checked me over, said I was lucky, that I should rest. But rest was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the words again. You can't run forever. By the time they let me go, the street was empty. The taxi had been towed, the debris cleared away. The city had already moved on. I stood alone under the flickering streetlight, the diary heavy in my hands. I didn't know where to go, but I knew one thing. He wasn't done with me yet. The night air felt heavier than before, thick with something unseen but unmistakable. I stood on the empty sidewalk, the street eerily quiet after the chaos of the accident. Every instinct told me to keep moving, but where? Home was no longer safe. The police didn't believe me, and somewhere out there, he was still watching. I tightened my grip on the diary, my hands slick with sweat. The words inside were changing, shifting when I wasn't looking. It was impossible, but I couldn't deny what I had seen. I glanced down at the page again, my breath catching as new ink formed right before my eyes. I see you. My pulse pounded. I whipped my head around, scanning the street, the alleyways, the rooftops. Nothing. Just flickering neon lights and distant traffic. But I knew better now. He was here, somewhere. I needed to disappear. Fast. Without another thought, I turned and walked in the opposite direction of my apartment. I kept my pace steady, forcing myself not to break into a full sprint. Running would only draw attention. The city stretched out ahead of me, a maze of glowing windows and darkened alleyways. I moved quickly, slipping through back streets, cutting across intersections without waiting for signals. The diary felt like a weight in my hands, a curse I couldn't rid myself of. After 20 minutes of walking, I found myself outside a rundown motel on the outskirts of the district. The neon sign buzzed weakly, a few letters flickering in and out. It wasn't much, but it was off my usual path, a place he wouldn't expect. The man behind the counter barely looked up as I slid a few bills across to him. He handed me a key with a smudged number on it, muttering something about checkout times. I didn't care. The room smelled like stale smoke and cheap cleaning products. A single dim lamp cast long shadows against the peeling wallpaper. I locked the door behind me, sliding the chain into place, then shoved a chair under the handle for good measure. My legs finally gave out, and I sank onto the bed, my body trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. I stared at the diary, still clutched in my hands. Every fiber of my being told me to throw it away, to burn it, to get rid of whatever nightmare had latched onto me. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I understood what was happening. I flipped through the pages again, past the meticulous descriptions of past murders, past the haunting details that felt too real to be fiction. And then I found something new, something I hadn't noticed before. A page with my name at the top, but beneath it, there were no details of my death, no time, no method, just 2 words. Keep writing. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just a diary, it was something else entirely. A message, a command, the pen. The one he had held when I saw him in my apartment. It matched mine exactly. I pulled my own pen from my bag, holding it up to the light. Identical. The weight, the design, everything. It was then that a terrifying thought settled in my mind. What if this diary wasn't just predicting deaths? What if it was creating them? I dropped the book as if it had burned me, my breath coming in quick gasps. If that was true, if writing in this thing somehow made events happen, then that meant I had a choice. I could let it happen, let my fate play out as written, or I could change the ending. A sudden noise snapped me out of my thoughts, a soft scrape against the door. Someone was outside. I froze, barely breathing. Another sound. This time, the rattle of the doorknob. Testing. The chair blocking the door shifted slightly. He had found me. I reached for my phone, my fingers fumbling to dial 911. But just as I pressed the call button, the motel phone on the bedside table rang. The shrill sound made my heart leap into my throat. It rang once, twice, then stopped. Silence filled the room. My phone screen still read, "Calling him 911." But no one answered. The call had been cut off. I stared at the motel phone, the receiver still in its cradle. I didn't want to pick it up. Every part of me screamed not to, but I had to know. Slowly, I reached out and lifted the receiver to my ear. At first, nothing, just static. Then a voice, low, amused, close. "You're still writing, aren't you?" The line went dead. A loud thud shook the door. I wasn't safe, not here, not anywhere. And the diary wasn't done with me yet. The door rattled in its frame, the chair scraping against the floor as someone pressed against it from the other side. My pulse pounded in my ears. I gripped the diary with one hand and my phone with the other. But the call to 911 had already dropped. Think. I had to think. I scrambled back, eyes darting around the motel room for something, anything, I could use to defend myself. A lamp, a rusty coat hanger. Nothing that would help against whoever was trying to force their way in. Another thud. The chair shifted. The chain lock trembled. I swallowed hard. The window. It was my only way out. Rushing to it, I yanked at the lock, shoving it upward. The window groaned in protest, stiff from years of neglect. Outside, the alley was dark, littered with trash and broken glass. But it was better than being trapped in here. A final, brutal impact sent the door bursting inward. The chain snapped, the chair skidding across the floor. I didn't look back. I threw myself through the window, landing hard on the pavement below. Pain shot up my arm as I rolled onto my side, the diary slipping from my grasp. Above me, the motel room door swung open. He was here. I forced myself up, ignoring the sharp sting in my ribs. I grabbed the diary and ran. The alley stretched ahead, narrowing into shadows. I didn't stop, didn't look back. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heartbeat deafening. The city blurred past, empty streets, flickering neon, the distant wail of a siren. I turned a corner too sharply, nearly losing my footing. The diary almost slipped from my grasp again, but I clung to it, the leather warm against my sweaty palms. Another turn, a fire escape, a way up. I grabbed the metal ladder and pulled myself up, each step sending jolts of pain through my aching limbs. The rooftops would give me an advantage, a place to hide, to think. I reached the top and pressed myself against the cold concrete, chest heaving. The city stretched out before me, endless and uncaring. For a moment I thought I had lost him. Then I saw him. He stood at the mouth of the alley, his shadow stretching long beneath the streetlight. Even from this distance, I could feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting. He wasn't running. He didn't have to. A cold dread settled in my stomach. This wasn't a chase. It was a game. I looked down at the diary. The pages had changed again. You can't run forever. My breath hitched. I turned the page. Another entry was forming, the ink bleeding into existence right before my eyes. I see you. Panic surged through me. I ripped the page out, crumpling it in my fist. It didn't matter. More words were already appearing. You can't change the story. My hands trembled. The city lights below flickered, distant and indifferent. No one knew what was happening. No one could help me. Then something new. A single chilling sentence. Turn around. My body locked up. The rooftop was silent. The wind whispered through the cracks, carrying the distant hum of traffic. I didn't want to look, but I had to. Slowly, heart hammering, I turned. He was standing there, just feet away. The same calm expression, the same slight smile. He raised his hand, and in it, he held something small, something I recognized instantly. A pen, just like mine. I told you, he said, voice low, steady. You can't run from this. I took a step back, but there was nowhere to go. The rooftop ended behind me, nowhere left to run. The diary's pages fluttered in my hands, the wind carrying his words. Finish the story. The wind howled between the buildings, whipping my hair against my face as I took another cautious step back. The edge of the rooftop loomed behind me, the city sprawling far below. My heart slammed against my ribs, each beat a frantic warning. The man stood in front of me, calm, composed, as if he wasn't standing in the middle of a deadly confrontation. His fingers rolled the pen between them, a slow, deliberate movement. He was waiting, watching. I swallowed hard, gripping the diary so tightly my knuckles turned white. What do you want? My voice barely made it past my dry throat. He tilted his head, considering. Then he smiled. You already know. The words sent a fresh wave of fear through me. My name was in this diary. My death had already been written. But why? I shook my head, trying to make sense of it. Who are you? His smile didn't waver. I've gone by many names. None of them matter. He took a slow step closer. But I know you, and that's what matters, doesn't it? I tensed. Why me? You picked up the book. His voice was almost amused, as if the answer should be obvious. And now it belongs to you. I glanced down at the diary, the pages still shifting, bleeding new words into existence. They formed even as I watched, as if responding to my fear. He steps closer. There is nowhere left to run. I snapped the book shut. This isn't real, I said, though I wasn't sure if I was talking to him or myself. This is just some sick game. He let out a soft chuckle. Reality is only a matter of perception. He lifted the pen, rolling it between his fingers. You don't understand yet, but you will. This isn't just a diary. It's a script. His eyes gleamed in the dim rooftop light. And I'm the one writing the ending. A sickening chill settled in my gut. No. My grip on the diary tightened. No, you're not. I turned to run, but my foot met empty air. For a split second, gravity suspended, the city lights blurring as my body tilted backward. My breath caught, then a hand shot out, gripping my wrist in a vice-like hold. I gasped as he yanked me forward, dragging me away from the ledge with inhuman strength. My knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the concrete, breath ragged. He crouched beside me, eyes filled with something unreadable. I told you, he murmured. This isn't about running. My entire body trembled. He hadn't let me fall. Why? He reached forward, fingers brushing the cover of the diary still clutched in my hands. You still don't understand, do you? I forced myself to meet his gaze. Then explain it. A flicker of something, amusement, curiosity crossed his face. You think you found this diary, he said, voice low. You think it was an accident. A slow, creeping horror settled into my bones. You didn't find the book. He leaned closer, his breath warm against my ear. The book found you. My stomach lurched. I scrambled backward, desperate to put space between us, but the words sank into me like hooks. The book found me. I shook my head, gripping my temples. That's not... You're a writer, aren't you? He continued, his voice silk smooth. You create worlds, characters, stories. You shape reality with every word you write. He tapped the diary. This isn't a book of predictions, he said. It's a book of creations. I stared at him, heartbeat hammering in my ears. You mean... My voice barely made it past my lips. This diary makes things happen? A slow nod. Everything written in it comes true. My breath hitched. That meant... I looked down at my own name on the page, the details of my supposed death. If this was true, if everything in this diary became reality, then I wasn't just reading my fate. I was walking toward it. He must have seen the realization hit me because he smiled again, pleased. That's right, he said softly. And now it's your turn to write. I shook my head violently. No, I didn't ask for this. I don't want any part of this. His expression didn't change. It doesn't matter what you want. I looked down at the diary again, fingers trembling as I flipped through the pages. Name after name, death after death. Had all of these people been chosen the way I had? Had they picked up this book only to find themselves trapped in its web? Or had they written in it? Had they chosen to play their part? I slammed the book shut, breath coming fast and shallow. I had to destroy it. Before he could stop me, I scrambled to my feet and ran toward the ledge. My hands shook as I lifted the diary over the edge, ready to hurl it into the abyss below, but his voice cut through the night. Go ahead, he said, tone light. Throw it away. I hesitated. He was too calm, too composed, like he already knew what was going to happen. Slowly, I turned back to face him. His smile widened. You can try to get rid of it, he said, stepping closer, but it will always come back. I gritted my teeth. You're lying. Am I? I looked down at the diary, heart hammering. The weight of it, the warmth. Somehow, I already knew he was telling the truth. I could throw it away, burn it, rip the pages to shreds, and still it would find its way back to me, because the story wasn't over. I wasn't just part of the book. I was its next author. He stopped just a few feet away from me, extending his hand, not in threat, but in offering. It's time to finish the story, he said, but this time, you get to decide how it ends. The wind howled around us. The diary pulsed in my hands, waiting, and I realized with a sickening certainty that I had already made my choice. The city stretched below me, endless and indifferent, the wind clawing at my clothes as I stood at the edge of the rooftop. The diary pulsed in my grip, its weight heavier than before, as if it knew the choice I had to make. The man watched me patient, his eyes gleaming with something between amusement and expectation. I could end this. I could refuse to play his game. I could fight. But deep down, I already knew the truth. There was no escaping the story. Slowly, I stepped away from the ledge. My fingers trembled as I looked down at the diary, its pages fluttering in the wind, waiting for me to decide how this would end. I had spent my life struggling to finish my stories, always abandoning them before they could take shape. But this wasn't just another unfinished draft. This was real. I swallowed hard, lifting my eyes to him. If I write something else, I asked, voice barely above a whisper, something different, will it happen? A slow smile curved his lips. Try and see. It could be a trap, another trick. But what choice did I have? If I did nothing, my fate had already been written. I took a deep breath, flipping to the last page. My name was still there, the ink dark and unyielding. The time of my death was approaching, minutes away. But there was still space left. With shaking hands, I raised my pen and pressed it to the page. The moment the ink touched paper, a strange energy crackled through the air. I hesitated, then began to write. He steps forward, the pen slipping from his grasp. His control shatters. The story is no longer his. As the words formed, I heard a sharp intake of breath. I glanced up. The man's expression had shifted. His confidence, his amusement. It was gone. His fingers twitched at his side, as if reaching for something unseen. He took an involuntary step back. I kept writing. He stumbles, his body growing weak. The power that held him vanishes. His breath came fast and shallow now. I could see it in his eyes. He understood what was happening. No, he whispered. I ignored him. The pen moving faster now, my fear giving way to something else. Control. The figure begins to fade, swallowed by the very pages he sought to control. The story does not belong to him anymore. A gust of wind ripped through the rooftop. The man staggered, his form flickering, shifting like a shadow, losing its place in the world. He reached for me, but his fingers passed through empty air. I had rewritten him. His mouth opened, as if to protest, but no sound came. Then, like ink washing away from a page, he dissolved. His body unraveled into wisps of darkness, swallowed by the very story he had tried to write. And then, he was gone. The rooftop was silent. The wind died down. The city lights flickered as if nothing had happened. I stood there, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the diary still clutched in my hands. I turned to the last page. The ink had stopped moving. My name was still there, but the date, the time of death, gone. I had rewritten my own ending. A wave of exhaustion hit me, my legs nearly giving out beneath me. I wanted to drop the diary, to leave it here and walk away. But I knew better now. The diary wasn't just a tool, it was something more, something alive, and now it belonged to me. I took one last look at the empty rooftop, the place where the man had vanished, then tucked the book under my arm and walked away. The city buzzed with life below, unaware of the nightmare that had just unfolded. As I made my way down the fire escape, I glanced at the diary one last time. The final page had changed. New words had appeared, written in handwriting I didn't recognize. Or maybe, just maybe, it had been mine all along. The story is never truly over, and beneath it, a new line, waiting to be written. I woke up to silence, a thick, suffocating kind of silence, the kind that doesn't belong in a place meant for justice. My head throbbed, my wrists burned, cold metal bit into my skin. I tried to move, but I was bound to a chair. My suit jacket was gone, my tie loosened. The air smelled like aged wood and something metallic, something wrong. And then I saw them. The judge sat high on the bench, face hidden behind a smooth, featureless mask. The jury box was full, 12 figures, all masked, all staring straight ahead. Shadows clung to the corners of the room like something alive, something waiting. I swallowed hard. "This is a mistake," I said, my voice hoarse. "Where am I?" The judge lifted a gavel. "Court is now in session." The voice was hollow, distorted, like it had been dragged from a grave. My pulse pounded against my ribs. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. A man stepped forward from the darkness, tall, broad-shouldered, draped in a black robe. His mask was different, plain, smooth, with a single slit where the mouth should be. The executioner. Something deep inside me twisted with a fear I couldn't explain. The judge turned toward me. "The defendant is charged with crimes against the innocent," the voice droned. "Unlawful prosecution, fabrication of evidence, sentencing the guiltless to death." I let out a breathless laugh, the sound bitter and shaky. "This is ridiculous. I'm a prosecutor. I don't—" A television screen flickered to life beside me. The footage was grainy, static buzzing in and out, but I recognized the scene instantly. A courtroom, my courtroom, and I was there, standing in front of a jury, voice sharp, certain. "Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence is clear," my recorded self declared. "The defendant was seen near the crime scene. Fibers from his coat match those found on the victim's body. His alibi does not hold. We must seek justice. I knew the case. It had been years ago. An open and shut conviction. I remembered the relief, the satisfaction when the verdict came down. Guilty. The man had been executed 6 months later. The screen flickered. Another case. Another trial. Another conviction. Case after case, name after name, all playing out before me. Some I recognized instantly, others buried deep in the recesses of my mind. Then the footage changed. Security camera footage. The same cases. The same investigations. But this time, I saw things I wasn't meant to see. A police officer handing me a report with evidence I knew didn't exist. A crime lab technician hesitating before signing a document. A judge questioning my certainty before I pushed harder, more forceful, more persuasive. And then, worse, documents altered, witness testimonies twisted. The wrong people led to death row while I stood in front of a jury, unwavering. This was a trick, a sick joke. This isn't real, I said, voice rising. You manipulated this footage. The judge ignored me. Does the jury have a verdict? 12 heads turned toward me in unison. The executioner took a step closer. My breath hitched. Wait. One of the masked jurors stood, voice muffled but firm. Guilty. The word hit like a hammer. The executioner moved again, reaching into his robe. I fought against my restraints, panic clawing up my throat. This is insane. You have no right. The executioner raised his arm. A blade gleamed in the dim light. I thrashed harder, my chair scraping against the floor. The judge lifted the gavel. Sentence to be carried out immediately. The executioner stepped forward. The blade flashed. I screamed. And then I woke up. My body lurched upright, drenched in sweat, breath coming in sharp gas. The room was dark. My room, my bed, a nightmare. I exhaled hard, running a shaking hand down my face. Just a dream. That was all. A nightmare born from stress, from years of high-pressure cases. I swung my legs over the bed, pressing my feet against the cold floor. I needed water. I needed something real, something solid to hold on to. I pushed myself up and walked to the bathroom. The tile was freezing beneath my feet, but I barely noticed. I flicked on the light, squinting against the brightness. And then I saw it, the reflection in the mirror. My shirt, soaked in sweat, clung to my chest, but there, carved into my skin, just below my collarbone. One word, a single jagged wound, red and raw, as if someone had traced it into my flesh while I slept. Retrial. The world tilted. My breath came fast and shallow. The nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. My hands trembled as I pressed my fingers against the carved letters in my skin. The pain was real, sharp, and raw. The wound wasn't deep, but it was fresh. Too fresh. I stumbled back from the mirror, my breath coming in short gasps. My mind fought against what I was seeing, searching for some rational explanation. Sleepwalking? No, that didn't make sense. Had I done this to myself? Impossible. Someone had been in my room. Someone had done this while I slept. A fresh wave of nausea rolled through me. I grabbed the sink, gripping it until my knuckles went white. The dream, or whatever it was, had felt too real. The masked judge, the jury, the executioner, and now, this, retrial. I forced myself to move, to leave the bathroom. My apartment was dark, silent, too still. My ears strained for any sound, any movement. I checked the front door, still locked, deadbolt in place. Windows, all latched. No sign of forced entry. But I didn't feel alone. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, my fingers slick with sweat. The screen lit up. 3:47 a.m. No missed calls, no messages, no alerts. Just the quiet hum of a city still sleeping. I hesitated, then opened my call log and dialed 911. The line rang once, twice, then it cut off. No dial tone, no automated response, nothing. I swallowed hard. I dialed again, same result. My internet was working, my emails refreshed, news articles loaded, everything else seemed normal, but I couldn't call out. It wasn't just fear gripping me now. It was something worse. I was being watched, controlled. I turned toward my bookshelf, eyes scanning the rows of case files stacked neatly in order. My career was built on these cases, on the criminals I had helped put behind bars. I had dedicated my life to justice. But now, for the first time, I felt something gnawing at the back of my mind. What if they hadn't all been guilty? The thought made me feel sick. I had built my reputation on my ability to convict, to argue beyond a reasonable doubt. I had prided myself on finding the truth, even when others couldn't. Hadn't I? The dream had shown me evidence I didn't remember. Documents altered, reports forged. But dreams weren't evidence. They were just nightmares. Weren't they? I grabbed one of the files, my hands shaking as I flipped through it. I knew this case. A man named Daniel Finch, executed 2 years ago, convicted of murdering a woman in a parking garage. The evidence had seemed airtight. Security footage showed him near the scene. His DNA had been found on the victim's jacket. A witness had placed him there. I skimmed through the documents, my breath shallow. Then I saw it. A crime lab report, buried in the stack. The DNA evidence had been inconclusive. I had argued otherwise. I had told the jury it was definitive. I dropped the file, my heart slamming against my ribs. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. A sharp knock at my front door made me jump. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I turned toward it, my pulse roaring in my ears. I was frozen, my body refusing to move. Then a sound, the whisper of paper sliding under the door. I forced myself to step forward, each movement slow, hesitant. I crouched, reaching for the envelope now resting on my floor. The paper was thick, old-fashioned, my name scrawled across the front in dark ink. I opened it with numb fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a case file, one I had never seen before, and attached to it, a photograph, a grainy image of a courtroom, a figure in a suit standing before a jury, his face barely visible, my face, and below it, in the same sharp handwriting that had been carved into my chest, "The trial begins at midnight." I dropped the paper, my breath catching in my throat. I turned toward the clock on the wall. 4:02 a.m. I had less than 20 hours, and I had no idea what was coming next. The hours stretched and twisted, time losing all meaning as the weight of the note pressed down on me. The trial begins at midnight. Those words echoed in my mind, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. I didn't leave my apartment. I couldn't. Every time I approached the door, a suffocating fear held me back. Someone had been inside while I slept. Someone had carved a word into my skin. If I stepped outside, what would they do next? Instead, I buried myself in my case files, searching for answers I wasn't ready to find. Daniel Finch. Executed for a crime he might not have committed. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe I misremembered the case. Maybe I hadn't seen that report. But the more I searched, the more I found. Other cases, other convictions, small inconsistencies. Documents I had sworn were solid, now riddled with doubts. A missing witness statement here, an altered forensic report there. I had told myself I was pursuing justice, but had I been chasing something else? By the time night fell, I was no closer to understanding who was behind this. My mind felt like it was unraveling, threads pulling loose, reality shifting. And then, at exactly 11:57 p.m., my phone screen lit up. Unknown caller. I stared at it, my fingers hovering over the answer button. The ringing stopped. A message appeared instead. Step outside. A cold sweat broke across my skin. My hands clenched into fists. I didn't want to. Every part of me screamed to stay put. But I already knew I had no choice. This was going to happen, whether I was ready or not. I grabbed my coat, hesitated for just a moment, then unlocked the door. The hallway was empty. The air was thick, heavy. The city outside my window had still been alive just minutes ago, but now everything felt eerily silent. I stepped out. The door slammed shut behind me. I spun, reaching for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. My own apartment had locked me out. A whisper of wind brushed past me, and I turned. At the end of the hallway, the elevator door stood open. The lights inside flickered. I didn't want to go in, but something told me if I didn't, I'd regret it. I forced my legs to move, one step, then another. The air grew colder the closer I got. I stepped inside. The door slid shut. The elevator didn't move. Then the overhead lights died. Darkness swallowed me. My breath caught in my throat. I reached for my phone, fumbling for the flashlight, but before I could turn it on, a dim glow flickered above me. The elevator screen lit up. Floor, courtroom. My stomach twisted. That wasn't real. My building didn't have a courtroom. The elevator shuddered, then began to descend. I pressed every button, but none of them responded. The air grew heavier, thick with something damp, metallic. The smell of aged wood and old paper. The same scent from my nightmare. The elevator slowed. Then with a jarring clang, the doors slid open. I stepped out onto marble floors. Wooden benches stretched in neat rows before me. A judge's bench loomed at the front, carved with intricate details that seemed to shift when I looked too closely. A courtroom, but not just any courtroom, the one from my nightmare. The jury box was full, 12 masked figures, silent, unmoving. The judge sat high on the bench, face hidden behind the same featureless mask. And in the center of the room, waiting for me, a chair. I couldn't breathe. The doors behind me slammed shut. The judge lifted the gavel. Court is now in session. The sound of the gavel echoed through the courtroom, sharp and final. My pulse thundered in my ears as I stood frozen at the entrance. Every detail of the room matched the nightmare that had haunted me the night before. The towering judge's bench, the masked figures seated in the jury box, the empty witness stand, all waiting for me. The executioner stood near the bench, motionless. The slit in his mask revealed nothing, but I could feel his gaze on me. I forced myself to speak, my voice hoarse. This isn't real. The judge ignored me. The defendant will take their seat. The masked jurors turned their heads in unison, waiting. I took a shaky breath. If this was a dream, I needed to wake up. If it wasn't, I needed to survive. I stepped forward, my footsteps heavy against the marble floor. The chair at the center of the room loomed before me, old and worn, its arms lined with thick leather straps. I hesitated. The executioner took a single step forward. My body moved before my mind could protest. I sat down. The moment I did, the straps coiled around my wrists and ankles like living things, tightening until I could barely move. The judge tapped the gavel once more. The trial of the prosecution begins. I swallowed hard. What am I being accused of? A masked figure in the jury box stood. Their voice was muffled, genderless, but filled with quiet authority. You sentenced the innocent to death. A screen flickered to life beside the bench. A grainy black and white image appeared. A courtroom, one of my own cases from years ago. Daniel Finch. I clenched my fists. The footage showed me addressing the jury, my voice firm, confident. I had no doubt in that moment, no hesitation. The screen shifted. New footage, one I had never seen before. The lab report, the altered documents, the missing evidence. A cold wave of nausea washed over me. I tried to speak, but my throat tightened. More cases followed, one after another. My voice strong and unwavering, demanding justice. The jury's verdict, guilty. The screen flickered again, and suddenly I was no longer in a courtroom. The image shifted to a dimly lit prison cell. A man sat hunched on a cot, head in his hands. The timestamp in the corner read 2 hours before execution. My stomach twisted. Daniel Finch. His fingers clutched a piece of paper, a letter never sent. His lips moved, whispering something I couldn't hear. Then the screen cut to black. I exhaled shakily. This isn't proof of anything, I managed, my voice weaker than before. Trials are complicated. We follow the evidence presented. The judge lifted a hand. New footage appeared. Security camera footage from a hallway. I recognized it instantly. My office. I was in the frame now, standing with a detective. He handed me a file, spoke in hushed tones. I took it, flipped through the pages. Then, without hesitation, I pulled a sheet from the folder and dropped it into the shredder beside my desk. I shook my head, my pulse hammering. Number, that never happened. The jury sat in silence. This is fabricated, I snapped. You're twisting reality. The judge's mask tilted slightly. We are only revealing the parts of reality you chose to forget. The words hit me like a slap. I wanted to argue, to fight back. But the evidence was there, playing before me. The missing report, the quiet deals in my office, the desperate appeals ignored. Was I really so certain they had all been guilty? Had I ever truly cared? A deep, creeping horror settled in my chest. I had been so sure I was on the side of justice. But now, faced with the consequences of my decisions, I wasn't sure anymore. The judge's voice pulled me from my spiraling thoughts. The jury will deliberate. 12 masked figures turned toward one another. No words were spoken, but I could feel the weight of their judgment. The room grew colder. The executioner's presence loomed beside me, silent and waiting. Then one by one, the jurors turned back toward the judge. One of them stood. The verdict was coming. I held my breath. The silence was unbearable. The juror who had risen from their seat stood motionless for a moment, as if savoring my fear. Then in a voice muffled by the mask, they spoke. Guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom, sharp and final. My pulse roared in my ears. The other jurors nodded one by one, their masks expressionless, their judgment absolute. No deliberation, no hesitation. The judge raised the gavel. The sentence will be carried out immediately. The executioner stepped forward, the floor creaking beneath his heavy boots. His gloved hands reached into his robe and pulled out a long, curved blade. The metal gleamed under the dim light, a cold and merciless thing. I thrashed against the restraints, panic clawing up my throat. No, I gasped. This isn't real. This isn't. The executioner took another step forward. My breathing turned ragged. My mind scrambled for logic, for reason. This is a nightmare, I said, desperate now. You can't kill me in a dream. The executioner said nothing. The blade lifted. I shut my eyes, bracing for the pain, for the cold bite of steel against my skin, a rush of wind, a whisper of movement. Then, darkness. I gasped awake, bolting upright. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. My sheets were damp with sweat, my hands trembling as they clutched at my chest. I was in my bed, my apartment. The soft hum of the city beyond my window told me it was still night. I sucked in a shaky breath, my body still locked in panic. My fingers moved instinctively to my wrists. No restraints, no wounds, just a dream, a terrible, suffocating nightmare. I exhaled hard and swung my legs over the side of the bed, pressing my feet against the cold floor to ground myself. My head was spinning. I needed to clear my mind. A drink, a moment to breathe. Anything to shake the feeling that something was still wrong. I dragged myself to the bathroom, flipping on the light. The fluorescent glow was too bright, too harsh, but I didn't care. I needed to see myself, to confirm that I was real, that I was here. I stared into the mirror, searching for any sign that what I had experienced had followed me back into the waking world. And then I saw it, a fresh wound, carved into my chest, not deep but unmistakable. A single word, raw and red, traced just below my collarbone. Retrial. The blood drained from my face. My breath came in shallow gasps, my hands trembling at my sides. Number. I turned sharply, expecting to see someone behind me, but I was alone. The apartment was silent. The door was still locked. But I knew the truth now. The trial wasn't a dream. It had been real, and it wasn't over. I sat across from the man in the interrogation room, tapping my pen against the metal table. The overhead light flickered, casting harsh shadows across the windowless walls. The air smelled of cheap disinfectant and old coffee, a scent I had long since stopped noticing. The witness sat with his hands folded neatly in front of him. He wasn't nervous. If anything, he seemed eerily calm, as if he had practiced this conversation 100 times before. His eyes, dark, unreadable, never left mine. Tell me again, I said, keeping my voice level. From the beginning. He nodded slightly, then leaned forward. The woman was killed last night, just after 11. She was alone, walking home from work. She didn't see him coming. I scribbled notes, my gut tightening at his certainty. And you saw this happen? He smiled, but it wasn't a smile that reached his eyes. Every detail. I glanced up at the two-way mirror, knowing my partner Reyes was watching from the other side. This case had landed on my desk just hours ago, an anonymous tip about a homicide that, as far as we knew, hadn't happened. No reports, no calls, no body. Go on, I said. The witness tilted his head slightly, like he was enjoying this. She turned onto Briarwood Avenue, a shortcut. She was tired, looking at her phone. That's when he grabbed her from behind. Hand over the mouth, quick and efficient. She struggled, but not for long. I kept my expression neutral, though my grip on the pen tightened. Briarwood Avenue was a dark stretch between two closed-down storefronts, the kind of place you wouldn't walk alone at night. The witness continued, his voice slow and deliberate. He used a knife. Clean, precise. One strike to the abdomen, just below the ribs. She fell instantly. There wasn't much blood at first. He waited, watched. When she stopped breathing, he dragged her into the alley. My pulse quickened. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't making this up. Then what? I asked. He smiled again. Then he left, walked 3 blocks east, tossed the knife down a storm drain, and disappeared into the night. Silence settled between us. I felt Reyes watching through the glass, waiting for my next move. I set my pen down. You seem to know a lot about this. The witness didn't blink. Because I saw it. But there's no report of a murder last night, I said carefully. No missing person, no crime scene. He shrugged. Then you haven't looked hard enough. Something about the way he said it made the hair on the back of my neck rise. Who was she? I pressed. His smile faded. Does it matter? Yes, it does. For the first time, a flicker of something crossed his face. Annoyance. Maybe even amusement. I think you already know who she is, detective. I stared at him, my stomach tightening. Reyes's voice crackled through the intercom. Step outside for a second. I didn't break eye contact with the witness. Stay here. He didn't move, just folded his hands again and waited. I stepped out into the dimly lit hallway, where Reyes stood with his arms crossed. His face was pale. We have a problem, he said. I exhaled sharply. What now? Reyes ran a hand through his hair, glancing at the interrogation room window. I checked with dispatch. No reports of a crime at Briarwood last night. No missing persons fitting the description. He hesitated. But that's not the problem. Then what is? Reyes gestured toward the monitor displaying the live feed from the interrogation room. Look. I turned. The room was empty. The chair was still pulled out. The table still had my notepad sitting on top of it. But there was no one there. I blinked, my pulse spiking. What the hell? I turned back toward the window. The man was still sitting there, but the camera showed nothing. The breath stalled in my throat. That wasn't possible. Reyes shifted uneasily. What the hell is going on? I had no answer. I turned back toward the room. The witness was still watching me through the glass, expression unreadable. He lifted one hand and waved. I didn't move. I couldn't. The witness sat there, calm and composed, watching me through the glass as if he knew exactly what I had just seen on the monitor. Reyes shifted beside me. Tell me you're seeing this. I'm seeing it, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. I turned back to the screen. The interrogation room remained empty. No movement, no sound, but I could still see the man with my own eyes, sitting there as real as Reyes standing next to me. My throat felt dry. Check the playback. Reyes hesitated, then turned to the computer and scrolled back the footage. The timestamp rolled in reverse. On the screen, the door to the interrogation room opened. I walked in. I sat down, and I started talking. To no one. Reyes exhaled sharply. Jesus. There was no man. No witness. I was speaking to an empty chair the entire time. My voice, muffled through the speakers, played back the questions I had asked, the pauses where the man had supposedly answered. I leaned forward, staring at my own expression on the screen. I looked normal, focused, engaged, like I was really talking to someone. Reyes scrubbed forward. The entire conversation played out exactly as I remembered it, except I was alone. Then at the moment I had stepped out of the room, the chair moved. Reyes paused the feed. Did you see that? I did. It was subtle. Just a small shift, barely noticeable, but it moved. Reyes rewound and played it again. That chair moved, I said. That chair actually moved. Neither of us spoke for a moment. The silence felt heavier now, thick with something we couldn't explain. Reyes turned to me. Who the hell were you talking to? I swallowed. I don't know. I turned back to the window. The man still sat there watching us. I could see him clear as day. But the camera said otherwise. A knot tightened in my gut. We need to check Briarwood. Reyes hesitated. What if it's nothing? What if we're losing our minds? I shook my head. He knew something. If there's even a chance a crime happened, we check. Reyes exhaled sharply but nodded. Let's go. I turned back to the room one last time. The man's expression never changed. He just sat there watching, waiting. I stepped forward, hand on the doorknob, but before I could open it, the lights flickered. And in the split second of darkness, when they flashed back on, the chair was empty. I stepped inside. Nothing. The air still smelled of stale coffee and cold metal. The notepad I had been writing on sat untouched on the table. Reyes checked the hallway. No sign of him. He's gone, he muttered. I wasn't so sure. I looked down at the notepad. My handwriting was there. The notes I had taken, the details of the supposed murder. And at the bottom of the page, something I hadn't written. A single line in someone else's hand. Find the body. Reyes looked over my shoulder. Okay, that's enough creepy shit for one night. I tore the page out and folded it, tucking it into my pocket. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. Let's go. We left the precinct and drove in silence. The city passed in a blur of neon and headlights, but my mind was stuck in that room, on that impossible conversation. Because if this was real, if the body was there, then who the hell had been sitting across from me? The streets were slick from an earlier rain, the city glowing in reflections of neon signs and traffic lights. Briarwood Avenue was nearly empty at this hour, a stretch of cracked pavement between two abandoned storefronts. A single street lamp buzzed overhead, its light flickering weakly against the darkness. Reyes pulled the car to a stop a block away. Neither of us moved at first. Tell me again why we're doing this, Reyes muttered, gripping the steering wheel. I exhaled slowly. Because if there's even a chance the witness was right, we need to check. Reyes tapped his fingers against the dash. Right, the witness that doesn't exist. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Nothing about this made sense. The words on my notepad played over in my mind. Find the body. I stepped out of the car, the damp air heavy against my skin. The street was silent, except for the occasional drip of water from a rusted fire escape. Reyes followed, his shoulders tense as he scanned the area. Let's make this quick, he muttered. We walked toward the alley. The witness had described it perfectly. The woman had been dragged behind the row of dumpsters, tucked away from sight. I turned on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. The alley was littered with trash, broken glass, and the remnants of things people had long since forgotten. But not everything had been forgotten. The second my light hit the farthest dumpster, my stomach dropped. A shoe, a single black sneaker, half hidden beneath the metal bin. Reyes saw it too. Shit. We moved quickly, pushing aside debris. And then, just like the witness had said, she was there. The woman lay on her side, her body unnaturally still, her jacket soaked through with blood. A dark stain spread across the concrete beneath her, dried at the edges. Her face was pale, lips slightly parted as if she had tried to speak before the end. Reyes let out a sharp breath. Jesus! I crouched beside her, my hands steady even as my mind raced. The wound was clean, precise, just like the witness had described. A single stab below the ribs, straight to the vital organs. My chest tightened. How the hell had he known? Reyes was already on his radio, calling it in. I barely heard him. My focus was locked on the woman, on the eerie stillness of her body. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled note, staring at the words one more time. Find the body. I had found it, but now I had a new question. Who had left this note for me? Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as they approached. The alley was about to be swarmed with cops, with forensics teams, with questions I didn't have answers to. I stood, backing away from the body. My pulse was hammering, but not from the crime scene. It was from the feeling creeping into my gut. That witness, whoever, whatever he was, had been real. And he wasn't done with me yet. The crime scene was a mess of flashing lights, yellow tape, and hushed voices. Officers moved in and out of the alley, their radios crackling with updates. The forensics team worked quickly, snapping photos, marking blood splatter, bagging every possible piece of evidence. Reyes stood beside me, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. So let me get this straight, he muttered. A guy who doesn't exist told you where to find a body that nobody reported missing? I didn't answer right away. I didn't have an answer. Instead, I watched as a medical examiner crouched beside the woman's body. He gently turned her head, inspecting the wound, before glancing up at one of the officers. Time of death, someone asked. The examiner frowned. Hard to say without a full autopsy, but I'd estimate somewhere between 11 and midnight last night. Reyes stiffened beside me. That's when the witness said it happened. I nodded slowly, my stomach twisting. None of this should be possible. The witness, if I could even call him that, had described the murder in perfect detail. The location, the time, the wound, everything. But he had never been there. And according to the security footage, he had never been with me either. Reyes exhaled sharply. I need a smoke. He turned away, pacing toward the curb. I stayed where I was, my thoughts tangled. Then something caught my eye. An officer was sealing a small evidence bag, carefully placing it inside a larger container. The item inside was small, metallic, faintly glinting under the streetlights. A knife. I stepped forward, my pulse quickening. Where was that? The officer glanced at me. Storm drain, just like you said. The words sent a chill down my spine. I hadn't said that. The witness had. Reyes returned, rubbing his face. All right, I need something that makes sense. Who was this woman? One of the techs flipped through his notes. Name's Emma Caldwell, 26 years old, lived a few blocks from here. No family reported her missing yet. Emma Caldwell. The name meant nothing to me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it should. Reyes looked at me, waiting. You okay? I forced a nod. Yeah. It was a lie. I wasn't okay, because something was very, very wrong, and it was about to get worse. One of the forensic techs approached, his brow furrowed. He held a clear plastic bag in his gloved hand, an object sealed inside. We found something else, he said, holding it up. I stared at it. A photograph. And not just any photograph. A grainy image of someone standing over Emma Caldwell's body, just moments after the murder. Someone holding a knife. Someone wearing my face. The world seemed to tilt. My lungs locked. Reyes snatched the bag from the tech's hand and looked at it, his expression shifting from confusion to something colder. He turned to me, his voice quiet but sharp. Tell me this isn't you. I opened my mouth, but no words came out, because I didn't know the answer. I stared at the photograph, my pulse a hammer in my chest, the figure standing over the body, the way the light hit their face. It wasn't just similar to me, it was me. Reyes kept his gaze locked on mine, his jaw tight. Tell me what the hell is going on. I swallowed hard. I don't know. He didn't like that answer. This isn't funny, man. I need you to start talking, right now. I shook my head, gripping the plastic evidence bag like it might slip through my fingers. I was at home last night. I didn't... You sure about that? Reyes cut in. The doubt in his voice hit harder than I expected. I looked back down at the photograph. My stance, my clothes, exactly what I had worn yesterday. The knife in my hand, the one we had just recovered, everything pointed to me, except I knew with absolute certainty that I had never been here before tonight, unless I had. A wave of nausea rolled through me. Reyes exhaled sharply. We need to get back to the precinct. I didn't argue. The ride back was silent. I kept replaying everything in my head. The witness, the security footage, the message on my notepad. Find the body. But why? What game was I caught in? By the time we reached the station, I felt like I was unraveling. My hands were unsteady as I walked inside. Officers moved around us, completely unaware that I was staring down the possibility of my own guilt. Reyes pulled me aside near the evidence lockers. I'm getting the interrogation footage from earlier. We need to go over it again. I nodded, though dread curled in my stomach. We stepped into the security room, where a row of monitors displayed live feeds from various rooms in the precinct. Reyes sat down, pulling up the file from my interview. The video started playing. The room, the chair, my notepad, and me, alone. I watched myself enter, sit down, start talking. But there was no one across from me, no witness, nothing. I gripped the edge of the desk, my breath shallow. This isn't possible. Reyes leaned forward, his face unreadable. You're talking to someone who isn't there. I shook my head. I saw him, Reyes. He was right in front of me. He told me about the murder. He knew details no one else could. Reyes didn't look convinced. You know what this looks like, right? I did. It looked like I had lost my mind. Or worse, like I was lying. The screen flickered. Both of us froze. The footage distorted for a moment, lines of static crawling across the screen. Then something new appeared. The witness. He was there. Not from the beginning, but suddenly, halfway through the footage, as if he had been inserted into reality itself. Reyes stiffened. What the hell? We watched as he leaned in, speaking to me. His face was still unreadable. Those dark eyes locked onto mine. Then just as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone, erased. The footage jumped forward, skipping time, and when it resumed, I was alone again. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Reyes turned to me slowly. What did he say to you, exactly? I swallowed, trying to steady my voice. He said I already knew who the victim was. Reyes stared at me. And do you? I didn't answer, because in that moment, something clicked. I turned abruptly and walked out of the room, my pulse pounding in my ears. Reyes followed, his footsteps quick behind mine. Where the hell are you going? I didn't respond. I needed to see something for myself. I moved through the precinct like a ghost, past the rows of desks, past the officers who barely glanced at me. The walls felt tighter, the air heavier. Then I saw it, a bulletin board near the entrance, a row of missing persons posters, and one of them, right in the center. A face I knew, my own. I stumbled back, my vision tunneling. The poster was crisp, freshly printed, my name typed in bold letters beneath the photograph. Missing since yesterday. Reyes stepped beside me, but his voice felt distant. What the? My ears rang. The walls seemed to tilt. None of this made sense. I was right here. I was standing here. But if that was true, then why? A flicker of movement caught my eye. I turned toward the glass door of the precinct, the city lights reflecting against its surface. And in that glass, my reflection stared back. But it wasn't moving with me. It just stood there, watching, smiling. And then, it stepped away. I gasped, the sound catching in my throat. Reyes grabbed my arm. Hey, what's wrong? I couldn't speak, couldn't move, because I knew, deep in my bones, I wasn't me anymore. I never had been.